I had never really given it much thought before, but Diane, my stepmother, was always present, always around. At 63, she possessed a grace that many women her age lacked. But tonight, something was different. My best friend Matt had come over, as he often did, but the way he looked at her, and how she smiled back at him, it felt like something had shifted between them, something I hadn't noticed before. It all began innocuously enough, with us sitting around the dinner table, but as the night wore on, I sensed a growing tension. Diane's hand brushed against Matt's as she cleared the table, lingering a moment too long. I noticed how Matt's eyes followed her, tracing her movements through the room, his gaze lingering on her in a way I had never seen him look at anyone before. After dinner, Diane excused herself to her bedroom. I thought nothing of it, assuming she was just heading to bed. But a few minutes later, Matt mentioned he needed to use the bathroom. He walked down the hall, and I didn't think twice until I heard a soft knock on her bedroom door. My heart started racing as I realized what was happening. Curiosity got the better of me after a few minutes, and I quietly made my way down the hallway. My footsteps were light as I approached the door. I could hear muffled voices, their whispers indistinct. My heart pounded in my chest as I pressed my ear against the door. I shouldn't be here. Matt's voice was faint. Then Diane's voice, soft and enticing, asked, "Then why did you come?" There was a pause before I heard the unmistakable sound of lips meeting. My breath caught as I realized they were kissing. In my mind, I could see it clearly. Matt, my best friend, leaning in, his hands gripping her waist, pulling her close. Diane's fingers running through his hair, guiding him deeper into the kiss. I knew I should walk away, but I couldn't. My feet stayed planted as I listened to the soft gasps and whispers. The kissing grew more heated, and I heard the bed creak as they shifted onto it. My mind raced, imagining what was happening beyond the door, but I couldn't bring myself to open it. I stood there, frozen, as my best friend and my stepmother crossed a line that could never be undone. Minutes passed, though it felt like hours. The sounds from the room continued, soft moans, the rustling of sheets, the bed creaking, and then silence. My heart pounded as I backed away from the door, retreating down the hallway, my mind spinning from what I had just overheard. When Matt finally emerged from the bedroom, his face was flushed, and he avoided my eyes. Diane followed soon after, her hair slightly disheveled, a faint, satisfied smile on her lips. They both pretended as though nothing had happened, but I knew better. From that night onward, everything changed. As they returned to the living room, I acted as if I hadn't noticed anything. Though my heart still raced from the events I'd just overheard, Matt sat across from me, his eyes darting everywhere except at mine. Diane, however, was the picture of composure. She smoothed her clothes and flashed a casual smile, as if nothing unusual had just taken place. "I'm going to bed," she said, her voice calm, betraying no guilt. "Good night, boys." Her gaze lingered on Matt just a second too long, and I caught it. She turned and disappeared upstairs, leaving Matt and me in heavy silence. I wanted to say something, anything, but I had no idea where to start. Matt looked pale, nervous. He ran a hand through his hair and finally spoke, his voice shaky. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened back there." He tried to make light of it, but I could see the guilt in his eyes. "You don't know what happened," I shot back, my voice harsher than intended. "You went into her room. Matt, you know exactly what happened." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, and for a moment I thought he might deny it, but instead he sighed, leaning forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I didn't plan for it to happen, okay? She made the first move, and I didn't stop it." Hearing him admit it made the knot in my stomach tighten even more. I had always trusted Matt, we'd been through everything together, and now it felt like he had betrayed me in the worst way. But more than that, I couldn't stop thinking about Diane, about how she had been the one to start it. I didn't know what to feel: anger, jealousy, confusion. It all swirled in my head, making it impossible to think straight. "Why her, Matt?" I asked, my voice quieter now, trying to make sense of it. "Why my stepmom?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at the floor for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up at me, regret mixed with something else, something darker in his expression. "There's just something about her, man," he said quietly. "She's not like other women, the way she looks at you, the way she makes you feel." I don't know how to explain it. I couldn't help it. Anger surged in my chest. I wanted to yell at him, to throw him out of my house, but something stopped me. Deep down, I couldn't deny that I had noticed the same things. Diane had an undeniable allure, an energy that was hard to ignore, and though I hated to admit it, there had been moments, fleeting, guilty moments, when I found myself drawn to her in ways I knew I shouldn't be. But unlike Matt, I had kept my distance, told myself it was wrong, that it couldn't happen. Yet here we were, my best friend admitting he'd crossed that line, and Diane clearly didn't regret it. After a long pause, I finally spoke, my voice low. "You need to leave, Matt." He looked at me, his face full of remorse, but he didn't argue. He knew there was nothing left to say. Slowly he got up, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Just before leaving, he turned back, his face a mixture of guilt and sadness. "I'm sorry, man. I really am." I didn't respond. I just watched him walk out, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. Once he was gone, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind racing. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had overheard, the way Diane had whispered to him, the way their bodies had moved together in the dark. It was wrong, so wrong, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something between us had shifted. I couldn't ignore that Diane had chosen Matt, but a part of me wondered, could it have been me? That night, sleep was impossible. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the events over and over. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of Diane, her touch, her lips, the way she had looked at Matt, but, in the dream, it wasn't Matt, it was me. The next morning, the house felt unnervingly quiet. Diane didn't come down for breakfast, and I did everything I could to avoid her. I wasn't sure what I would even say if I saw her. However, by the afternoon, the silence became unbearable. My heart pounded in my chest as I headed to her room and softly knocked on the door. "Come in," she called from inside. I opened the door and stepped in. Diane sat on the edge of her bed, brushing her hair. She glanced up at me with that calm, knowing smile, as if she had been expecting me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice gentle, almost concerned. I didn't know how to answer. I just stood there, staring at her, my mind racing with all the questions I wanted to ask. I wanted to know why she had done it, why she had chosen Matt, but no words came out. Instead, I found myself stepping closer, drawn to her despite everything. She remained still, saying nothing as I stood before her, our eyes locked. And then, before I could stop myself, I leaned in, my hand brushing her cheek, my lips finding hers. For a moment, she didn't respond. But then, slowly, she kissed me back. Her lips were soft, warm, and all the guilt and confusion I had been feeling seemed to dissolve in that single kiss. When we finally pulled away, I saw the same hunger in her eyes that I had seen in Matt's the night before, but this time it was directed at me. I didn't want it to be him, she whispered, her breath warm against my lips. "I wanted it to be you." Hearing those words sent a shock through me. Suddenly, everything I had felt, all the guilt and confusion, made sense. Diane had wanted me all along. She had only gone to Matt because she couldn't have me. And now, here we were, crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. I stood there, her words echoing in my mind, the weight of everything pressing down on me. My heart was racing, torn between what I desired and what I knew was right. Diane, my stepmom, had just confirmed what I had feared all along. This wasn't just a fleeting moment of passion, it was something deeper, something that had been simmering for a long time. But as I looked into her eyes and saw that hunger, I realized this wasn't only about her feelings. I had my own to confront as well. Feelings I had buried, pushed down because I knew how wrong they were. Yet now, everything was out in the open. I took a deep breath and stepped back. "We can't do this, Diane," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "This isn't right." Her expression shifted, the seductive glint in her eyes fading. "I know," she admitted quietly. "I know it's wrong." But she paused, searching for the right words. "There's something between us. I can't ignore it anymore." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words, but also the consequences of what we had done pressing down on me. "You're my stepmom," I said, shaking my head. "We've crossed a line, and if we keep going, there's no turning back." For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. She wasn't the confident, alluring woman I had seen before. She was human, flawed, conflicted, just like me. "I don't want to hurt you," she whispered, "or Matt or anyone. But I don't know how to stop these feelings." Silence stretched between us, and in that moment, everything became clear. I had to be the one to end this, not just for her, but for myself. I cared about Diane, I couldn't deny that. But what we had done, what had almost happened, wasn't love. It was something else, something born from loneliness, confusion, and desire. "I think we need some space," I finally said, my voice steady. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a while. We need to figure this out, but not like this." Diane nodded, her eyes cast downward. "I understand," she said softly. "I'm sorry for everything." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. A wave of emotions, desire, confusion, guilt washed over me all at once. My mind screamed that this was wrong, that I needed to walk away, but my body wouldn't listen. Her intense gaze held me in place, like she had been waiting for this moment as long as I had, even if I hadn't admitted it to myself until now. Slowly, I sat down beside her on the bed. Diane reached out, her fingers grazing the back of my neck, pulling me closer. Her touch sent shivers down my spine. I leaned in, our lips meeting again, but this time the kiss was more passionate, more intense, filled with a kind of longing neither of us could control. It was as if all the tension from the night before had finally reached its breaking point. As we kissed, her hands roamed over my chest, her fingers tracing my skin, making my heart race. I mirrored her movements, my hands moving over her back, pulling her closer to me. The room seemed to fade into the background as we gave in to something that had been building for far too long. But just as quickly as it had started, reality came crashing back down on me. I pulled away, breathing heavily, my heart racing. Diane gazed at me with a mix of confusion and desire, her lips still parted from our kiss. "We can't do this," I mumbled, standing up abruptly, my thoughts swirling. This was my stepmom. How had it come to this? Diane's face softened, and she let out a sigh, slowly rising and approaching me with care, resting her hand lightly on my arm. "I know it's complicated," she said softly, her voice gentle and calming. "But I also know you feel it too. She wasn't wrong, I did feel it, but that didn't make it any less wrong." "I don't know what this is or how to handle it," I admitted, still trying to grasp what was happening. Diane gave a soft smile, her hand gliding down my arm. "We don't have to figure it all out right now," she whispered. "Let's just take it step by step, no pressure, no expectations." I looked at her, torn between the desire still pulsing through me and the weight of what this all meant. I knew we had already crossed a line, and there was no going back now, not after everything. And despite the guilt and confusion, a part of me didn't want to return to the way things were. Diane moved closer again, her fingers running through my hair as she pressed a soft kiss to my cheek. "Let's not overthink it," she murmured, her breath warm against my skin. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My heart pounded, but something inside me shifted. Maybe Diane was right. Maybe we didn't need to have all the answers right away. Maybe this was something that was just meant to happen, something we couldn't fight any longer. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Diane smiled gently, her eyes full of understanding. "Come on," she said softly, taking my hand. "Let's just lie down for a bit." I hesitated briefly, but without another word, I followed her to the bed. As we lay down beside each other, Diane wrapped her arms around me, holding me close. The warmth of her body was both comforting and unsettling, but I couldn't deny the calm that began to settle over me as I closed my eyes, letting myself drift into the moment. The next few days were strange, to say the least. Matt didn't come around, and I hadn't reached out to him. I wasn't sure how to face him after what had happened. And with Diane, everything had shifted in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. We didn't talk about that night again, but there was an unspoken understanding between us. It felt like we had stepped into new territory, where the usual rules no longer applied. Diane became more relaxed around me, more affectionate, a touch here, a lingering glance there. It was subtle, but it reminded me of the connection we had shared. One evening as we sat together in the living room, she leaned in and kissed me softly on the lips. This time I didn't pull away. I kissed her back, allowing myself to get lost in the moment again. But then something unexpected happened. Diane pulled back slightly, looking into my eyes with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "We need to talk about this," she said quietly. "I know what's between us is real, but we need to think about where this is going." I swallowed hard, knowing she was right. Whatever this was, it couldn't stay hidden forever, and we couldn't keep pretending we were living in some kind of bubble. "I don't regret what happened," she continued, her voice steady. "But I don't want to hurt you or Matt or anyone else." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, I truly felt the weight of the situation. This wasn't just about us, it had consequences, big ones. Sooner or later, we'd have to face them. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so confused." Diane reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "We'll figure it out," she said softly. "But for now, let's take our time, no rushing. We need to be honest with ourselves about what this is and what it's not." I nodded, grateful for her calm approach. It felt like a burden had been lifted off my shoulders. We didn't have all the answers yet, but at least we were on the same page. In the weeks that followed, things between us settled down. The intense passion was still there, but we became more cautious, more thoughtful. We talked openly, trying to understand what had drawn us together in the first place. It wasn't just physical. Though that played a big part, there was something deeper, a connection that had been forming for years without either of us realizing it. Eventually, we agreed to keep things quiet for the time being, giving ourselves space to think and decide what we really wanted. Diane and I both understood that what we had wasn't something we could maintain long term, but we also knew we couldn't return to how things were before. We had changed, and so had our relationship. As the weeks passed, I found a sense of peace in that understanding. Diane and I weren't rushing into anything anymore. We were letting things unfold naturally. And while the future was uncertain, one thing was clear: whatever path we chose, we would face it together, with honesty and understanding.